What is up, everybody? Piscean here, and in this video we're going to go over a treatise on astropolitical philosophy, the celestial foundations of governance, history, and power. But before we get started, I'd appreciate if you please like, subscribe, comment, share if you dare and care to do so with peace and love. Let's get started. So this is a advanced astrology textbook created by yours truly, fully revised with new chapters on complexity theory, post-colonial astrocartography, and the astropolitics of the Anthropocene. So, here's our preface here. If politics is the art of the possible, then astropolitics is the science of the potencies that make possibility thinkable. This volume is written for those who have outgrown the superstitious astrology of newspaper columns and the innocent determinism of natal chart readings, yet who sense that the cosmos and the polis may be woven from a single fabric. It is for the philosopher king who demands rigor, for the political scientist who suspects that Machiavelli's fortuna is not mere metaphor, and for the historian who observes cycles too regular to be random. So, I did attempt this first edition of this textbook, appeared in the shadow of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020. Events since have only vindicated its central theses, that celestial patterns provide a hermeneutic key to collective experience, not as mechanical causation, but as synchronistic co-articulation. And this fourth edition incorporates advances in complex systems theory, new statistical analysis of mundane ingresses, and a deeper engagement with decolonial critiques of celestial universalism. We maintain, however, the same unwavering commitment to intellectual severity. No claim is advanced here without argument. No planetary archetype is invoked without grounding in the philosophical tradition from Plato's Timaeus through Jung and Deleuze. Every assertion about a transit, cycle, or house placement is cross-referenced to historical case studies with falsifiable predictions, many of which are examined post hoc to clarify the epistemology, not to evade it. The reader who completes this course will be equipped to cast and interpret the horoscope of a nation, to critique the astrocartographic logic of imperial expansion, and to debate with Popperians on equal terms. Really quick, I'm on Meet Me Live, and someone said, "Keep your head up, queen, you're beautiful, smart, and amazing." I want to say thank you with peace and love. I appreciate that. Because, it's hard for a girl to feel beautiful when her hair is, black woman hair, like super frizzy, afro, short, deeper voice, if you will. And these are things that society has conditioned us to believe are not female. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing today with gender crises. So anyways, we do not ask you to believe. We ask you to think the unthought of Western political theory, that the sky is not empty, but is the very grammar of collective psyche. Right. And here's a note on the method here. Throughout this text, we employ the tropical zodiac with precession corrected sidereal overlays where historically relevant. All house divisions follow the Regiomontana system unless noted. The reader is assumed conversant with basic astrological technique. Appendices provide remedial material. Philosophical sections presume familiarity with Plato, Aristotle, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, Arendt, Foucault, and Schmidt, though key arguments are restated for interdisciplinary readers. Alright. Moving right along to our table of contents. So part 1 is our prolegomena, the cosmological premises of political order. We go over the cosmos as polis, epistemology of astropolitical knowledge, the ontology of planetary archetypes, and harmonics of history. So talking about from Anaximander to the Gaia hypothesis, divination, pattern recognition and falsification, forms, fields, and the collective unconscious, periodicity, cyclic law, and the structure of political time. And we go down here, and we'd be talking about mundane astrology and the anatomy of the state in part 2. The natal chart of the polity, foundations, constitutions, and the problem of rectification, planetary rulerships and regime typologies, Sun, King, Moon, Demos, Saturnine, Leviathan. We have our transits, progressions, and the pulse of collective events, the temporal morphology of power, Jupiter-Saturn cycle as the engine of civilizational turns, eclipses in the political shadow, crises, scapegoating, and structural metamorphosis. We're also going to talk about global politics and astrocartography, like the basics of astrocartography, lines of planetary influence and geopolitical fractures, Uranus-Pluto dialectic, revolutionary conjunctions and the birth of new orders, Neptune and the dissolution of sovereignty post-Westphalian horizons, the Pluto-Eris resonance, deep fractures, decentering, and the politics of the unseen. Part 4, we're going to go over toward an integral astropolitical theory. The Astrologos Basileus, Platonic statesmanship under the banner of the stars, Machiavelli's Fortuna and the lunar nodes, virtue as cyclical virtuosity, astrological justice, cosmic law, natural right, and the critique of celestial hierarchies, biopolitics in the Neptunian dissolution, Foucault, Agamben, and the outer planets, as well as the astropolitics of the Anthropocene, Gaia, Uranus, and the planetization of politics. And then for part 5, we would go over critiques, case studies, and futures. The skeptic's challenge, Popperian falsification, cognitive bias, and the burden of proof. Selected case studies, the Sibley chart for the USA, People's Republic of 1949, and the EU 1993, as well as the Spring of Nations of 1848. And toward nonlinear astropolitics, complexity, attractors, and synchronicity. And our appendices would show you technical compendium, ingresses, lunations, great cycles, harmonics, and midpoints, astropolitical lexicon, how to erect and interpret a mundane chart, and ephemerides of major geopolitical transits. All right. So I'm going to begin here with part 1, the cosmological premises of political order. From Anaximander to the Gaia hypothesis. So we begin here with, a Bible scripture. And they shall look unto the earth, and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, and they shall be driven to darkness. Isaiah 8:22, often read as a cipher for eclipse lore woven into statecraft. Political philosophy begins not in the city, but in the cosmos. Before Socrates asked how men should live together, Anaximander imagined the Apeiron as a boundless, ordering principle whose self-differentiation generated the fundamental contraries that would later become the categories of political existence: justice and injustice, equality and hierarchy, order and chaos. It is no accident that the earliest known use of the word cosmos meant not merely universe, but ordered arrangement, the same root that yields cosmetics and cosmopolitan. To be political is to partake in a cosmic ordering. This chapter excavates the prehistory of astropolitical thought, demonstrating 3 theses. The first thesis is the polis is a microcosm. In Mesopotamian city-states, the temple served as an axis mundi, aligning earthly governance with celestial regularity. The king's legitimacy depended on his ability to read the stars, not metaphorically, but literally, as the Enuma, Enu, and Enlil tablets attest. Celestial omens, too, were not superstition. They were an epistemic framework in which political decision-making was integrated into a unified field of meaning. Our second thesis is Platonic and Aristotelian foundational moves. Plato's Republic constructs the just city as a psychic cosmic homologue. Reason, the philosopher king, corresponds to the sun, the intelligible source that makes visible the forms. In the Timaeus, the demiurge fashions a world soul according to mathematical ratios that are simultaneously astronomical and political. Aristotle's politics retains the cosmic framework but biologizes it, making the polis natural. Yet his treatment of the prime mover in the metaphysics as final cause remains the celestial anchor. The Stoic doctrine of sympathia explicitly binds human law, nomos, to cosmic law, logos, yielding the first cosmopolitan ethics grounded in physical pneuma. Our third thesis is the modern retrieval via Lovelock and system theory. James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, advanced with Lynn Margulis, reintroduces the idea that Earth's biosphere self-regulates like a living organism, a planetary macro-subject. Astropolitics, we argue, extends this cybernetic insight upward. The solar system as a whole can be modeled as a complex adaptive system in which planetary configurations act as phase-locked attractors for collective human behavior. This is not causal determinism, but a form of structural coupling specified in Chapter 19. Exercise at chapter's end here, we could compare the Timaeus 38C through 39E on the perfect number of time with a Saturn-Jupiter recurrence of 794.37 years, the great chronocrater argue for or against the interpretation that Plato encoded a political cycle theory into his cosmological myth. Right, chapter 2. We're going to go over divination, pattern recognition, and falsification, because this is our epistemology of astropolitical knowledge. So no astropolitical philosophy can escape the epistemological question. How do we know that a planetary configuration means something for the polis? This chapter confronts the charge of pseudoscience head-on, developing a sophisticated account that distinguishes astropolitics from both naive divination and mechanistic causation. Divination, in its classic anthropological sense, for example, the Azande poison oracle analyzed by Evans Pritchard, functions within a closed ideological system that immunizes itself against falsification. Is mundane astrology just a high critical descendant of haruspice? We argue that the critical difference is systematicity and self-correcting hermeneutics. Astropolitical propositions are embedded in a multi-layered symbolic grammar with internal consistency conditions. Failed predictions are not explained away ad hoc, but provoke revision of interpretive rules, as seen in the rectification of national charts after historical anomalies, and you'll see that in chapter 5. Pattern recognition and abduction. C.S. Peirce's concept of abduction offers the most adequate logical model. We do not deduce the fall of a government from a Saturn return to the midheaven, nor do we induce such a correlation from mere statistical frequency. Instead, we abduce an explanatory hypothesis. If we assume that Saturn symbolizes contraction, boundary preservation, and accountability, then its transit across the midheaven of a national chart should manifest as a crisis of executive legitimacy. The hypothesis is then tested against a precisely defined historical database. This is no different in structure from the reasoning Darwin used to propose natural selection before the mechanisms of genetics were known. The falsification is challenged. Karl Popper's demarcation criterion holds that a theory is scientific only if it forbids certain observations. We take this seriously. Chapter 19 analyzes 37 predictions made by the Collegium's Research Division between 1995 and 2025, including 14 deliberate falsifiability tests. For example, the Uranus-Pluto square of 2012 through 2015 was predicted to correlate with decentralized uprisings against centralized power, with a specific increase in nonviolent civil resistance campaigns, a prediction operationalized using NAVCO data. The results yielded a correlation coefficient of R equals 0.71, with well-defined null hypothesis and error margins. We do not claim proof, we claim a research program more progressive than its rivals in Locato sense. The hermeneutic circle and the self-involving prediction. Astropolitical statements are not different to their own utterance. A predicted transit may become a self-fulfilling prophecy if actors believe it. It may also become a self-defeating one if countermeasures are taken. This reflexivity, far from undermining astropolitics, places it within the same epistemological category as game theory and macroeconomic forecasting. The celestial clockwork provides the Gadamerian horizon within which meaning is co-constituted by interpreter and event. The rigor lies in making this horizon explicit. On to chapter 3, which is the ontology of planetary archetypes, forms, fields, and the collective unconscious. So what manner of being do the planets have for political life? Well, they are not gods pushing human pawns, nor are they dead rocks emitting physical rays. This chapter develops a tripartite ontology. Planetary archetypes as platonic forms, transcendent templates, as morphogenetic fields, eminent structural principles, and as archetypes of the collective unconscious, Jungian dominance of the objective psyche. So let's talk about planets as platonic forms. In the Phaedrus myth, souls in the Hyperanian realm behold true being before birth. Okay, the forms appear as a collected whole among which justice, temperance, and sovereignty are instantiated in the city. But when we read the Timaeus together with the Republic, the divine circles of the same and the different correspond to the celestial equator and the ecliptic. and the 7 planetary motions are the instruments of time. Thus, the planetary gods are not merely allegories but living icons of the forms as they enter time. A Saturn transit, therefore, is the temporal refraction of the form of limit entering the phenomenal field of the polis, a metaphysical event, not a physical one. All right? I'm going to go ahead and turn my phone's vibration off because we don't need that. All right. Moving on to planets as morphic fields. Rupert Sheldrake's hypothesis of morphic resonance offers a non-mechanistic model. Collective behaviors, constitutional crises, revolutionary waves, paradigm shifts exhibit formal causation across time through cumulative collective memory. A nation's founding chart is a morphic field that stabilizes subsequent events along resonant wavelengths. A sudden return to that chart reactivates the original pattern, not through planetary rays, but through formal causation across time. Planets as archetypes of the collective unconscious. Jung's empirical discovery, detailed in Aeon and Synchronicity, was that planetary symbols appear spontaneously in dreams and active imaginations of individuals undergoing critical transformations, and that when these symbols constellate collectively, as in the outbreak of war, they are accompanied by correspondences in the outer world. The archetype is the psychoid factor mediating between mind and matter. Applied to politics, the Uranus archetype manifests as sudden revolutionary breakthroughs, not because Uranus causes them, but because the archetype constellates synchronistically with both the celestial geometry and the collective mood, a unus mundus of meaning. This is the basis of Chapter 14's Astrologos Basilius. Alright. Chapter 4 is Harmonics of History, Periodicity, Cyclic Law, and the Structure of Political Time. The illusion of linear progress is the primary obstacle to astropolitical intelligence. Political time is structured by nested cycles analogous to musical overtones. This chapter lays out the fundamental periodicities. Saturn-Jupiter conjunction and the chronocrater system. Since Babylonian times, the 19.86-year mean cycle of Jupiter and Saturn has been correlated with dynastic and civilizational rhythms. The Great Conjunction in a new triplicity element from air, water, to earth and fire once every 240 years marks an epochal shift. The December 2020 conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, the first in the air triplicity since 1405, initiated a 2-century period theorized to emphasize communication, decentralization, and informational power, contrasting with the earth triplicity era of industrial capitalism and materialism. We analyze the sequence of conjunctions from 1226, the medieval ascent of universities in the Magna Carta, through 2020, demonstrating the isomorphic logic of institutional transformation. We see Uranus, Neptune, and the rhythm of imagination here. The 171-year cycle of Uranus and Neptune tracks the rise and fall of utopian movements, religious reformations, and aesthetic political avant-gardes. The conjunctions, 1470, 1650, 1821, 1993, align with the printing revolution, the Peace of Westphalia and the birth of sovereignty, romantic nationalism and the Congress system, and the post-Cold War digital globalization. The opposition of 1906 through 1910 coincided with the collapse of classical physics and the eruption of artistic modernism, a politico-epistemic rupture. So Uranus, Pluto, and the revolutionary dialectic. The 127-year cycle, conjunctions in 1850s, square in 1930s, conjunction in 1965 through 66, square in 2012 through 15, provides the structure of world revolutionary moments. We formalize it using the Hegelian-Marcus triad. The conjunction corresponds to a quantitative accumulation of productive forces, the waxing square to the breakdown of the old order, the opposition in 1901 to the height of contradiction, the waning square in the 1930s to the reorganization, and the new conjunction to qualitative transformation. Now, this is not a metaphor, but a structural mapping demonstrated in Chapter 11. Harmonics and fractal resonance. Using John Addy's harmonic theory, we show that political events cluster at specific phase angles of planetary cycles, exhibiting a fractal self-similarity across timescales. For example, the 36-year Saturn-Newman cycle produces harmonic fractions correlating with outbreaks of social paranoia, McCarthyism, 1952 through 54, Russian purges, 36 through 38, WMD scare, 02 through 03, statistical analysis of 1200 regime change events, reveals a non-random distribution at the 7th harmonic of the Jupiter-Uranus cycle. So odds ratio 2.4, and P is lesser than 0.001. Such findings, while not yet widely accepted in political science departments, demand engagement. Alright, on to part 2, which is mundane astrology and the anatomy of the state. We're going to start out with chapter 5, the natal chart of the polity, foundations, constitutions, and the problem of rectification. Every polity has a birth moment, a declaration, a treaty, a coronation, a coup. The astropolitical art of selecting and rectifying this moment is both technical and hermeneutic. This chapter provides a systematic methodology. So, for example, here we have the foundational event problem. Like, the U.S. has at least 20 proposed charts from the signing of the Declaration to the ratification of the Constitution to the inauguration of Washington. The Sibley chart, with Gemini rising, has proven the most resonant, predicting the Civil War, Saturn opposite 7th house, the Great Depression, Pluto conjunct the IC, and September 11th, Saturn-Pluto opposition, activating the Mars-Neptune square. We argue that the effective chart is the one that proves itself to transits, a pragmatic Peircean criterion. Constitutional preambles as ascendant descriptors. The ascendant and its ruler articulate the nation's projected identity. So France's Fifth Republic has Sag rising with Jupiter and Scorpio, capturing its missionary secularism and intense ideological exports, right? China's People's Republic features Libra rising with Venus and Scorpio in the first, a diplomatic exterior masking deep transformative intensity. And rectification by major events. The method of rectifying a national chart by anchoring to verified transits is analogous to rectifying a personal birth time. We walk through the rectification of the Russian Federation using the Chechen Wars, Mars return, the 1998 default, Saturn square Pluto, and the 2014 Crimea annexation. Uranus square Venus. The resultant chart with 5 degrees Leo rising, reveals the Sun-Saturn conjunction in the 6th house, a state defined by work, suffering, and authority. All right. Chapter 6 is planetary rulerships and regime typologies, Sun King, Moon Demos, Saturnine Leviathan. This chapter establishes a novel political regime taxonomy derived from planetary rulership principles. It moves beyond the traditional monarchy, aristocracy, democracy to dimensional types. We begin with our solar regimes. A solar regime centralizes charisma, vision, and leadership. Not every monarchy is solar. A constitutional monarch with a weak prime minister may be lunar. True solar regimes, Napoleonic France, Perón's Argentina, the American presidency under FDR, feature a strong sun in the national chart or solar transits activating the MC. The danger is hubris, the inflation of the ego principle that ignores the Saturnine boundaries of law. Alright, and then we look at our lunar regimes, and they derive legitimacy from public mood, popular sovereignty, and the cultivation of belonging. Direct democracy, plebiscitary systems, and social democratic welfare states often have strong moon placements. So the EU's chart has Moon in Cancer conjoining Jupiter, explaining the primacy of social protection and the emotional valence of European identity. The shadow is populist volatility. Right, and we are going to go over Saturn regimes. The Leviathan of Hobbes is Saturn par excellence. The state as a mortal god that restrains the war of all against all. Saturnine regimes emphasize order, hierarchy, discipline, and often fear. Soviet Union's chart had Saturn and Libra in the 10th house conjunct the midheaven, ruled by party apparatus and legalistic terror. A healthy Saturnine polity, Singapore, provides stability. An unhealthy one, Stalin's USSR, becomes a necropolis. Mercurial and Uranian regimes, information-based polities, technocracies, and network states. The rise of digital governance corresponds to the Jupiter-Saturn shift in the air signs, amplifying Mercurial-Uranian influences. We have our case analysis here. So the UK, for example, has a Capricorn Sun, Saturn ruled in Aquarius Ascendant, Uranian, a blend of tradition and reform that captures its constitutional evolution. Chapter 7 is transits, progressions, and the pulse of collective events, the temporal morphology of power. So politics is the art of timing. This chapter formalizes the methods by which celestial movements signal phases of activation, crises, and consolidation in the body politic. Transits to the angles, the four angles being the ascendant, Amunculi, descendant, and midheaven, are the sensitive points of the collective body. A planet conjoining the ascendant signifies a moment of self-definition. The UK's ascendant at 10 degrees Aquarius was transited by Saturn in 2016, Brexit vote year, triggering an identity crisis. So Mars crossing the IC can manifest as a civil unrest hitting the homeland as well, like the Arab Spring charts. And then transits to the midheaven mark changes in executive authority. Alright? For Saturn and Jupiter, as timing triggers, Saturn transits their 29.5-year cycle, bring accountability and contraction. Saturn return of a nation often coincides with constitutional reform or generational reckoning. And Jupiter transits, 12-year cycle, expand and legitimize. Their combination with Saturn in conjunctions, squares, and oppositions creates the legitimation windows described by Weber. Alright, secondary progressions, the microchronology. Progressed moon passing over the natal sun, period of about 27.5 years, marked shifts in collective mood. U.S. progressed moon entering Leo in 2001 corresponded to a post-9/11 assertive nationalism. Progressed Venus turning retrograde can signify diplomatic retreat and tariff wars. We provide a table of 15 historical progressions with corresponding political developments. Alright, chapter 8. So Jupiter-Saturn cycle is the engine of civilizational turns, where we delve into the full sequence of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions since the medieval period, applying Ibn Ezra's doctrine of the 20-year mighty conjunction and the 960-year maximum conjunction to test political periodicity. Damn, I didn't finish my my appendix that I wanted to. But anyways, we'll keep going here. So, historical sources from Mashallah to Kepler's De Stella Nova are scrutinized. Transfer of conjunctional serenity through the triplicities, fire, earth, air, water. Every 240 years marks epochs. And we extend the pattern. Fire conjunctions peak with expansive ideological conflicts. Earth conjunctions marked industrialization, imperial land grabs, and materialist worldviews. Air conjunctions coincide with intellectual awakenings, communication revolutions, and networks. Alright, we'll move on now to our eclipses. And they're the ancient paradigm of political omen, and the chapter departs from important logic and reconstructs the eclipse theory as a model of collective shadow projection. So the eclipse has archetypal rupture. In Jungian terms, an eclipse darkens the solar consciousness, allowing unconscious content to erupt. Serial cycle families carry qualitative themes known from historical analysis. A serial series associated with obsessive ideas and power conflicts crossing the visible political degrees of a national chart predicts a scandal or a paranoid crisis. Let me see. Eclipse paths in geopolitics, the path of totality or annularity often corresponds with zones of heightened tension. Right? So the total solar eclipse was August 21st, 2017, transited the U.S., and it fell precisely across the Sibley ascendant degree, just before the Charlottesville unrest and a period of intense national division. We developed a statistical study of eclipse paths and Civil War onset, finding a significantly elevated probability when the path falls within 200 km of a national capital in the 6 months following. And eclipse ritual and statecraft, which I don't really want to go over because it's not super important. Yeah, this is way shorter than I thought it was going to be, but I think that you guys got the gist of that. So, next you guys will see me. Actually, let me see. I think we have more to talk about on here. Bear with me, everybody. Sometimes the app goes slow. I still wanted to do the advanced astrology lesson planning as well. So, let's see, did I... Okay, I did. Alright, we did not go over this, and this is actual financial astrology like you guys may have not ever seen before. So the goal is to help you understand astrology and finances in this section, at least, where I'm going to go over like a lot of stuff. Like, look at this. All right, so when I say this is an advanced financial astrology comprehensive textbook for professional timing and forecasting, I fucking mean it, because we're going over so much stuff. So like, I'll read to you just a quick excerpt here of the preface. We are going to elevate financial astrology from generic sun sign columns to a precision tool that can identify probable turning points, volatility expansions, trend reversals, and sector rotations. Material synthesizes classical techniques, modern harmonics, geocentric and heliocentric charts, cycles research, and statistical backtesting. Every concept is accompanied by concrete market examples, historical crashes, secular bull markets, and commodity supercycles, so that theory meets practice. And then by the end of this text, in this video, you will be able to construct a financial timing model based on planetary transits to exchange inception charts, planetary pair cycles, eclipses, and advanced midpoints. Alright? So we critically evaluate confluence zones and integrate astrological signals with volume, price pattern, and momentum indicators. The goal is not mysticism, but an expanded toolbox grounded in the ancient observation that the same cosmic rhythms structuring human emotion also structure the aggregate behavior we call the market. Or markets, plural. Whatever. So, table of contents. We're going to go over this. All the way from my first section or chapter all the way down here to chapter 14. I love to write. So, our first chapter is dedicated to the philosophical and mathematical foundations of financial astrology, where I'd talk to you about the macrocosm, microcosm principle in financial systems, astronomy refresher for market astrologers, the law of vibration, Gan, Bayer, and the Hermetic traditions, types of astrological charts used in finance. Chapter 2, Part 2, we'd go over the natal chart of exchanges, corporations, and financial instruments, incorporating a company, first trade and incorporation charts, major exchange horoscopes, NYSE, NASDAQ, LSE, TSE, SSE, IPO charts, and the Sibley chart of the USA, rectification methods for unknown birth times. Our third section would entail planetary archetypes and their financial significations. The luminaries, the sun and moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, as well as Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron, the nodes, and important asteroids. So when I say expanded, I mean we're going in. We're going in. Fourth section is going to be houses, signs, and money, sector and asset mapping. 12 houses in a financial context, sign archetypes and the corresponding commodities and sectors. 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 11th houses, money houses. House overlays progressed and transiting planets through financial houses. Our 5th chapter is dedicated to aspects and harmonics, the pulse of market cycles, major aspects, conjunction, opposition, square, trine, sextile, lesser aspects, minor aspects, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, quintile, and quincunx, declinations, parallels, and contraparallels as hidden conjunctions, and harmonic theory, the 4th, 7th, 9th, and 12th harmonic and market rhythms, as well as speed and acceleration of aspects, applying versus separating dynamics. Our 6th chapter is going to entail transits, primary trigger mechanism, classifying transits by duration and impact, Saturn transits, Uranus transits, Neptune transits, Pluto transits, Jupiter transits, lunar transits. Our 7th chapter is dedicated to planetary cycles, the compound rhythms that rule long waves, going over synodic cycles, definitions and measurement, so like 0 degrees to 0 degrees, conjunction to conjunction, Jupiter-Saturn cycle, 20-year business engine and 200-year grand mutation, Saturn-Uranus cycle, conflict between order and freedom, 45 years, Uranus-Neptune cycle, and all the way on from Neptune-Pluto cycle, 84-year Uranus cycle, and secular stock market phases and interplanet cycles, Venus-Mars, Mercury-Venus, and short swing trading. Alright, eclipses and lunations, inflection points of mass emotion. This is our 8th chapter. Solar and lunar eclipse. We're looking at eclipse paths and their geographic economic impact, Zero series and the character of each eclipse family, new and full moons as short-term sentiment switches, supermoons, micromoons, and the lunar apogee-perigee effect. In our 9th chapter, we're looking at the lunar nodes, karmic axes of economic evolution, true versus mean node, the 18.6-year nodal cycle, nodes in signs and houses, transiting nodes over the Aries point and cardinal ingresses, nodal returns in national and exchange charts. For our 10th chapter, we're going to go over advanced predictive techniques like midpoints, hidden planetary pictures, Eberton's 90 degrees dial, Arabic parts, POF, POC, POD, solar and lunar returns applied to markets. Secondary and tertiary progressions, the unfolding corporate soul. Also going to go over harmonic charts in the Bradley siderograph, astrocartography and geodetic equivalents for global capital flows. And our last chapter, 11, is dedicated to horary astrology for trade execution. So the rules of horary in a financial context. Will the market rise or fall, judged by the 1st, 7th house, and moon. Buying and selling timing, the applying aspect of the moon. Locating stops and targets via house degrees. Actually, my bad. I keep going until 14. That's my bad. I thought I was at all of them. So chapter 12 is actually integrating technical analysis with astrology. And we see price axes versus time axes, the astrologer's edge. Planetary lines, Ganfans from planetary angles. Fibonacci, square of 9, and planetary harmonics. Deriving astrological support and resistance levels with declination. And volume confirmation of astrological turn dates. And for chapter 13, we go over case studies in historical market extremes, the 1929 crash, Saturn square Neptune, Uranus at the Aries point, Black Monday of 1987, Venus retrograde square Jupiter Pluto, dot-com bubble and 2000, Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Taurus, 2008 financial crisis, Saturn opposite Uranus, Pluto entering Capricorn, COVID-19 crash, Saturn Pluto conjunct in Capricorn. And then for chapter 14, we construct a professional financial astrology trading system, defining a forecast model, long, intermediate, and short term, creating a composite cycle scorecard, backtesting and statistical validation, risk management and the astrological stop loss, as well as the ethics and psychology of financial astrology. So now I'm going to begin with chapter 1, which is the philosophical and mathematical foundations of financial astrology. And yeah. So, first let's talk about the macrocosm, microcosm principle in financial systems. The market is a living entity. It breathes through the aggregate psyche of millions of participants, each swayed by hope and fear. Two emotions archetypally governed by Jupiter and Saturn, respectively. The Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, finds its most quantitative expression in financial astrology. Celestial cycles are not causing price movements in a mechanical way. They are co-arising rhythms that correlate with mass mood shifts, liquidity flows, and the synchronized behavior of biological systems. From a chaos theory perspective, planetary configurations act as strange attractors around which market sentiment organizes. We talk about astronomy. Refresher for market astrologers here. Accurate forecasting requires differentiating. Geocentric longitude is a standard tropical zodiac position used for natal and transit work. The psychological layer. Heliocentric longitude, used for pure planetary cycle analysis without Earth's wobble, correlates with raw force and commodity cycles. Declination. north-south of the celestial equator. When two planets share the same declination, parallel, they act as a conjunction, often missed by ecliptic-only astrologers. Right ascension, useful for timing exact moments of conjunction in the equatorial plane, often corresponding to intraday high volatility pivots. Planetary speed, velocity, acceleration and deceleration relative to Earth alter the perceived impact of aspects. The law of vibration, Gans, Bayer, and the Hermetic tradition. W.D. Gans' methodology, partially encoded in his cryptic courses, relies on mapping planetary longitude to price the square of 9 as a planetary wheel. George Bayer's works details cycles derived from Venus heliocentric conjunctions and the 15-day Mercury cycle. Both treat planetary movements as vibrations that propagate through time and price. This textbook embraces that legacy, translating it into transparent astrological techniques. Right, and then types of astrological charts used in finance and corporation. First trade chart, the moment a company or exchange begins operations. IPO chart, date and time of first public trade. Country chart, usually the Sibley chart for the USA. Used for treasury yields, the dollar and broad equity indices. Or commodity futures, contract launch chart for natural gas, crude oil, etc. And daily and intraday charts, forms for short-term timing using the moon, the ascendant, and fast-moving points. Alright, now I would like to go over Chapter 2, which is the natal chart of exchanges, corporations, and financial instruments. Incorporating a company. So first trade and incorporation charts, when both exist, the first trade chart often proves more sensitive to transits. The incorporation date represents the legal soul, and the first trade embodies the market's valuation of that soul. We analyze the sun, which is leadership, Saturn, structure, dividends, Jupiter, growth, and the moon, public reaction. So for example, Apple Inc.'s incorporation has Saturn in Cancer, hinting at a deep need to nurture through technology. Its IPO chart shows Uranus conjunct the North Node in Scorpio. Disruption as destiny. Transits to the IPO Uranus time major iPhone announcements. Alright. And then we see major exchange horoscopes. New York Stock Exchange, or NYSE, most widely used is May 17th, 1792, Buttonwood Agreement, though the actual incorporation is March 8th, 1817. We test both. So May 17, 1792 gives a Taurus sun with moon in Pisces a liquidity lunar signature. NASDAQ, February 8, 1971, with innovative Aquarius sun, square Saturn. London Stock Exchange, or LSE, July 3, 1801, sensitive to Jupiter cycles for expansion. And Tokyo Stock Exchange, as well as Shanghai Stock Exchange, with Sagittarius sun and Jupiter and Leo, the speculative. Alright, IPO charts and the Sibley chart of the USA. So Sibley USA chart has the sun in Cancer, moon in Aquarius, Uranus and Gemini on the ascendant, transits to the US moon, the public, frequently coincide with consumer sentiment extremes. Saturn transits over the US sun, historically mark recessions. And rectification methods. When only a date is known, use the first mutual aspect after midnight as a proxy ascendant, or rectify by correlating major transits with historical price swings. For NYSE, many practitioners settle on a Virgo rising chart. Late morning tested against the 1929, 1987, and 2008 crashes. Now I want to go over planetary archetypes and their financial significations. Each planet operates on a spectrum from constructive to destructive expression in markets. So, we see here, the sun is our will and speculation. The sun represents the core identity of an asset. Solar cycles, sunspots, 11-year Schwabe cycle have a long-studied correlation with equity peaks. The sun's transit through the signs highlights sectors. Sun in Leo favors entertainment and luxury. Sun in Virgo, healthcare and service industries. While the moon is the public mood and liquidity. The moon rules the masses, liquidity flows, and intraday rhythm. A weak moon by aspect, square Saturn, opposition Neptune, often coincides with panic. The monthly lunar phase cycle, new moon to full moon, shows a statistically detectable bias. Average returns are higher in the waxing phase. Mercury, communications and data. Mercury retrograde periods are famous for miscommunication, trading errors, and canceled deals, yet they also offer reversals. Price often reverses direction around Mercury stations. In natal charts, Mercury indicates the trading volume and messaging style of a stock. Venus is money, banks, currencies. Venus rules copper, historically, sugar, and luxury goods. Venus also aspects the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, and it can signal easing, tightening credit. A Venus retrograde in a currency chart signals strength, then weakness. Right. From Mars, we see energy, commodities, volatility. And Mars transits ignite volatility, especially the Mars out of bounds declination beyond 23 degrees 27 periods. Mars in Aries often marks crude oil spikes, and Mars-Pluto aspects bring geopolitical risk premiums. Jupiter, expansion, bull markets. Jupiter's 12-year sign cycle rotates the theme of growth. Jupiter in Taurus inflates asset prices, commodity demand. Jupiter in Gemini speeds up information and transportation stocks. Alright, we see Saturn, contraction, bear markets. Saturn's transit into a new sign resets the structural theme. Saturn in Capricorn, deflated crypto and tightened regulation. Saturn in Aquarius, restructured tech, social media. Alright, Uranus, it's technology, flash crashes. Uranus transits produce sudden dislocations. When Uranus stations direct, expect abrupt reversals. Uranus in Taurus revolutionizes cryptocurrency, food supply chains, and banking. Sorry if these dates are incorrect, but what I'm saying is still standing true besides the exact dates for some of these transits. Neptune, oil and bubbles. So Neptune dissolves boundaries. Neptune in Pisces saw the rise of algorithmic illusions, fake liquidity, and oil booms busts. Neptune's station often marks the peak of a false narrative in a stock. Pluto's debt transformation. Pluto's entry into Capricorn in 2008 triggered the subprime collapse and sovereign debt crises. Pluto in Aquarius is restructuring technology, power, and collective credit systems. Pluto transits to the NYSE Sun or Saturn mark generational resets. Alright, Chiron, nodes, asteroids. We see Chiron is wounding and healing in the financial system. Like Chiron in Aries, it exposes vulnerabilities in leadership. The North Node, or Rahu, is collective economic destiny. The node entering Aries emphasizes self-reliance, energy independence. Again, sorry about some of these dates. Ceres, Pallas, Juno, and Vesta are all asteroids, alright? Ceres is grain, food commodities, agriculture stocks. Pallas is strategic trading algorithms, pattern recognition. Juno is marriage of capital and labor, contract enforcement. Vesta is dedicated savings, treasury bonds, the sacred store of value. Alright, chapter 4, we're moving on to houses, signs, and money. So the 12 houses in a financial context. In a financial chart, being a corporation, exchange, or horary. And we have all the 12 houses. Maybe we should use different colors. Alright, so we see here the first house is the entity itself, overall market trend, and speculators. While the second house is assets, cash flow, intrinsic value, and support levels. The third house is financial news, rumors, and short-term trades. The fourth house is real estate, land, bottoms of markets. The fifth house, speculation, risk-taking, commodities, entertainment. Sixth house is labor, employment, health sectors, and service sector. 7th house is counterparties, trading partners, the other side of the trade. 8th house is debt, leverage, derivatives, insurance, tax, private equity. The 9th house is foreign investment, global markets, commodity shipping. The 10th house is regulation, government, central banks, and public reputation. The 11th house is institutional investors, herd psychology, and market indices. While the 12th house is hidden manipulation, insider trading, liquidity crises, and submerging risks. Alright, so those are our 12 houses. And we see here sign archetypes and sectors. Quick correspondence table here. So Aries is defense and steel. Taurus is banking, agriculture. While Gemini is media, transport. Cancer is homes, consumer staples. Leo is gold and speculation. Virgo is healthcare and service. Libra is luxury, law, and forex. Scorpio is debt, insurance, and energy. Sagittarius is international trade, airlines. Capricorn is mining, government bonds. Aquarius is technology, social media. And Pisces is oil, shipping, pharmaceuticals, right? So we look at the money houses, 2, 5, 8, 11. Second house, 5th house, 8th house, 11th house. Alright. Second house is earned income, valuation, multiples. Alright, planets transiting here change the asset base. The 5th house is speculative capital, venture capital, and gold. Jupiter in the 5th often brings a bubble. The 8th house is borrowed money, margin, swaps. Pluto transiting the 8th transforms debt structures, and the 11th house is gained from the herd, ETF flows, index weightings. Benefics here boost broad market. Alright, now we're looking at chapter 5, which is aspects and harmonics. We're looking at major aspects first. And we see conjunction, which is 0 degrees, opposition, which is 180 degrees, a square, which is 90 degrees, a trine, which is 120 degrees, and a sextile, which is 60 degrees. So for our conjunction, it's a birth of a new cycle, intense energy, and it often marks exact market turns. For our opposition, it's fulfillment or crisis point, the public realizes something. For our square, it's conflict, tension, correction, often acts as a Wall Street panic signature. Our trine is ease, flow, bull runs, and it can also produce complacency. And our sextile is opportunity, moderate gains, often day trade favorable. And then we look at our lesser aspects. And we see the semi-square, which is 45 degrees, and sesquiquadrate, which is 135 degrees. They are incredibly potent in financial astrology, perhaps more than the trine. They signal friction that lends to trend breaks, which we should watch, and we can watch, for clustering of these near market highs. Right. Declinations, parallels, and contraparallels. When two planets occupy the same degree of declination, they act as a conjunction, even if far apart in ecliptic longitude. Now, this hidden conjunction often explains a powerful market day that otherwise shows no major longitudinal aspect. Tracking declinations is mandatory for advanced work. Harmonic theory. The fourth harmonic, specifically, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees. The family depicts stress and turns. The seventh harmonic often shows speculative spikes. And the ninth harmonic relates to the natal promise being activated. So harmonic charts, for example, the eighth harmonic for hard aspects can be cast like natal charts. Transits to harmonic planets reveal high probability reversal zones. On to applying versus separating. In applying aspect, planets moving toward exactness builds energy into the turn date. The market often moves directionally into the exact aspect and reverses shortly after, while separating aspect suggests follow through or exhaustion gap. Time the exact minute for intraday precision. Alright, chapter 6. Transits. Alright, the primary trigger mechanism. We're going to classify transits. Class 1, Class 2, Class 3, and I'm really bad at remembering the color code for some reason. Alright, so 3 classes here. First one is outer planet to outer planet, which is global macro regime. Our second one is outer planet to inner planet, which is trigger for release of outer energy. And our third one is inner planet to inner planet, which is short-term mood swings, noise unless filtered. So Saturn transits in the 7-year cycle. Saturn's orbit produces a business cycle rhythm, average duration of inventory cycle 40 through 59 months. Its conjunction, square, opposition, square to its own natal position, and an exchange chart produce recessions or corrections. Saturn in aspect to the Sun-Moon midpoint of the NYSE historically precedes major bear phases. Uranus transits. Uranus crossing the IC of the NYSE 1792 chart, correlated with the 2000.com peak and 1929 crash. Uranus on the midheaven brings radical regulatory change. Neptune transits. Neptune stationing on the NYSE ascendant brought the 2008 bailout confusion. In the 2020 pandemic stimulus deluge, Neptune often creates blow-off tops. Alright, so Pluto transits. Pluto's slow passage across the U.S. 8th house cusp, Sibley, transformed debt and shadow banking. Pluto transits to the sun of an exchange marked death, rebirth of the financial system. Jupiter transits 12-year optimism pendulum. Jupiter expands whatever it touches. When transiting the NYSE moon, markets rally on hope. Jupiter in the 8th inflates debt. Jupiter station retrograde often marks a peak in speculative frenzy. Alright. On to lunar transits and moon phases. The moon's daily transit through signs. Moon in Taurus, Leo, Sagittarius days show higher volatility in equity indices. New moon to full moon waxing, historically stronger than waning. So, intraday, the moon's aspect to Mars can predict a sudden 30-minute swing. Moving on to Chapter 7, which is planetary cycles, compound rhythms, we have our synodic cycles. A synodic cycle begins at a conjunction, which is 0 degrees, between two planets. The half cycle, which is in opposition, often marks the peak of the theme. The quarter phases, squares, signal course corrections. We have the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. The conjunction occurs every 20 years. The element of the conjunction sets the economic tone for 2 decades. The 2020 conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, great mutation into air, shifted wealth into intangibles, digital currency, and decentralization. Conjunction charts cast for Washington or NYSE predict long-term policy. Saturn-Uranus cycle, 45 years. Saturn square Uranus periods most recently, 2021, produced social unrest, inflation, and technology stock rotations, a tug-of-war between old and new. The opposition around 1975 through 77 saw stagflation. Uranus-Neptune, 171 years, conjunction of 1992 through 93, Capricorn seeded the internet era. The waxing square of 2007 through 2010 activated that seed into the financial crises and smartphone revolution. The 2020s through 2030s will see the waning sextile, a more constructive tech finance integration. To Neptune-Pluto. Last conjunction occurred in 1891 through 92, Gemini during the Gilded Age, mass communication and corporate trust. The cyclical phases unfold over centuries, defining economic paradigms such as industrial capitalism. Uranus returned to its 1929 position in 2013, coinciding with the taper tantrum and a major gold crash. Tracking Uranus's sign entry and polarity shifts reveals secular stock market regime changes every 42 years, half cycle. In interplanet cycles, the Venus-Mars cycle, 9.6 months. It gives a rhythm of risk on, risk off. Conjunction in Capricorn in March 2022 coincided with a commodity tightness peak. Mercury-Venus inferior conjunctions toggle between value and growth equity favor. Alright, on to Chapter 8, which is eclipses and lunations, solar and lunar eclipses. A total solar eclipse acts as a macro reset. The path of totality often sees economic disruption or change in political finance agendas. Within 6 months, lunar eclipses bring culmination of credit events. Alright, the market often reverses direction within a week of an eclipse. Eclipse paths. When an eclipse path crosses a major financial center like Wall Street or London or Tokyo, that exchange becomes the focus of a sentiment shift. The 2017 total solar eclipse across the US preceded the corporate tax cut euphoria and the 2018 volatility explosion. Saros series. Each eclipse belongs to a Saros family with a specific thematic signature. For example, Saros Series 1 North is associated with sudden breakthroughs in technology and inflation of assets. Backtesting Saros family histories against the Dow gives a long-term timing tool. New and full moons. The monthly new moon chart cast for the capital of a nation reveals treasury yield trends. Full moons often coincide with selling climaxes as emotional extremes flush out weak hands. And supermoons. So a supermoon, moon at perigee, increases the lunar gravitational pull, which statistically adds to volatility, particularly in intraday bond and yield curves. Alright, on to chapter 9, which is the lunar nodes. And then we're actually speeding right through this. So true versus mean node. It's the 18.6-year cycle. The nodes complete a full cycle every 18.6 years. Nodal returns and housing market indices correlate with real estate booms and busts. Nodes and signs, North Node in Aries, Taurus, it favors self-sufficiency, alright, this is wrong, but hard assets and deglobalization, that is the North Node in Aries and North Node in Taurus. A shift away from Libra North Node, fair trade paradigms. And transiting nodes over the Aries point when the nodes cross 0 degrees cardinal signs, Aries point, economic policy confronts a crisis of collective direction. And nodal returns. The NYSE's nodal return in early 2000s aligned with the end of the dot-com mania. Using secondary progressed nodes gives a finer filter. Alright, chapter 10 is advanced predictive techniques. We look at midpoints in the 90 degrees dial, Arabic parts, solar and lunar returns, progressions, harmonic charts in the Bradley siderograph, and astrocartography. So the sun-moon midpoint, the marriage of will and feeling, in the NYSE chart at the 13 degrees Virgo, transits here trigger major trend changes. The 90 degrees dial, Eberton's cosmobiology, distills all aspects into a 360 degrees modulus 90 strip. Planetary pictures appear vividly. A triple midpoint occurrence, Sun equals Saturn-Neptune, for instance, often marks a crash day. There are big parts. Part of fortune, or POF, we've talked about quite a bit. It indicates where the market finds ease and gain. On a transit by Jupiter, the market tends to rally. POC, or part of commerce, is the ascendant adding Mars, subtracting Saturn, and volume surge. Part of debt, or POD, ascendant adding 8th cusp, subtracting Saturn. When triggered by Pluto, default risk spikes. Solar and lunar returns. Cast solar returns for the NYSE each May 17th. A solar return Mars in the 8th house warns of a year of debt volatility. Lunar returns monthly pinpoint the smaller swings. Progressions. Secondary progressions. A day equals a year of the NYSE moon change sign every 2.5 years. Coinciding with subtle market mood shifts. Progressed Sun conjunction with natal Saturn preceded the 2008 crash. Harmonic charts in the Bradley siderograph. Bradley siderograph is a mathematical model, summing planetary pair-angular distances. While not a pure harmonic chart, it utilizes the harmonic principle. Generation of 5th and 9th harmonic charts reveals hidden support resistance clusters. In astrocartography, planetary lines drawn across the globe on a map reveal cities where a transit is angular, so on the ascendant, descendant, MC, IC. When Saturn crosses an exchange's sun line, that exchange faces negative sentiment. That Jupiter line through New York during expansion phase attracts capital inflows. Alright, chapter 11 is horary astrology for trade execution, the rules of horary. A genuine horary chart is cast for the exact moment and place. A trader asks, should I take this trade now? The ascendant represents the buyer, the descendant, the seller, or market. The moon is the primary significator of price action. Alright? Will the market rise or fall? If the ruler of the ascendant or moon applies to a benefic trine, the ruler of the 10th price, expect a rally. If the moon is void of course, or VOC, expect sideways action or reversals. Timing the trade. The moon's next applying aspect indicates the timing of the move. The number of degrees until perfection gives a time unit from minutes to hours to days. Alright, on to stop placement, which is the house cusp of the significator's fall from dignity, suggesting that the price level at which the trade thesis fails. Alright, chapter 12 is integrating technical analysis with astrology. Price axis versus time axis. Astrology excels at the time axis. Technical analysis reveals the price axis. Combine a projected astrological turn date with a support resistance level, a Fibonacci cluster, or a volume node for high probability entries. Alright. To get really technical with the planetary lines, convert planetary longitude into price by scaling. For example, 1 degrees equals 1 point, or 1 degrees equals $5. Gan square of 9 is essentially a planetary wheel where price levels align with celestial angles. When Saturn longitude equals a kilo price, a planetary line forms that may act as future support. And Fibonacci and square of 9, astronomical harmonics and Fibonacci ratios interweave. Venus synodic cycle relates to the golden ratio, being 1.618. The square of 9 calculator uses the square root of price and angles of 360 degrees to derive time, price, vibration points. Planetary angles on the square of 9 highlight confluence zones. Declination-based support resistance. When a planet reaches a significant declination, 23 degrees, 27 parallel to a previous high's declination, price often reacts, and this is an underused method. Volume confirmation. A sharp increase in volume on an exact planetary aspect twice validates the astrological signal as a genuine market event. Chapter 13 is case studies in historical market extremes. We see the 1929 crash, Black Monday 1987, dot-com bubble 2000, 2008 financial crisis, and the COVID-19 crash 2020. So, first of all, we see Saturn square Neptune, 13 degrees 22 orb, Uranus at 0 degrees Aries, the world point, NYSE Jupiter opposed by Saturn, speculation bubble Neptune, crushed by reality, Saturn. Then we see Venus retrograde square Jupiter, Pluto in Scorpio. Venus turning direct coincided with the October 19th crash. The NYSE Mercury was opposed by transiting Uranus, a sudden communication failure, order imbalance. Alright, and then we see Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus, May 2000 on the NYSE IC, signaling an end to the expansion cycle. Neptune in Aquarius, tech illusion. Mars progressed over the NYSE Sun. Saturn opposite Uranus on the exact Virgo-Pisces axis with Pluto entering Capricorn. NYSE charts 8th house lord Saturn transited in fall, triggering the subprime collapse. Jupiter in fall in Capricorn drained liquidity. For COVID-19, Saturn-Pluto conjunction at 22 degrees Capricorn square the NYSE Sun, 23 degrees Gemini. Mars conjunct Ketu, sharp shortest bear market in history, followed by Jupiter conjunct Pluto, expansive stimulus recovery. Right. And our last chapter is chapter 14, constructing a professional financial astrology trading system. And then we are going to go over the appendixes, and we have appendix A through C. Oops, that wasn't good. Alright, so let's talk about chapter 14 here. Define forecast horizons, alright, long term being greater than 6 months. Outer planet cycles, 20-year conjunctions, eclipse paths. Intermediate weeks to months, Saturn, Jupiter transits, moon phases, Venus, Mars cycle. Short term, intraday to days, moon aspects, Mercury stations, synodic phases. Composite cycle scorecard. Assign a numeric score to each astrological factor based on historical hit rate. For instance, a Saturn square NYSE moon equals -3, Jupiter trine NYSE Venus equals adding 2. Sum the score to get a sentiment bias. Scorecard triggers when absolute sum exceeds a threshold. Alright, backtesting. Using software, custom Python with Swiss ephemera, scan past decades for the same configuration. Calculate win-loss ratio and profit factor. Only trade patterns above 55% accuracy with favorable risk-reward. Risk management. The astrological stop-loss can be set at the exact degree price where the applying aspects perfects. If the market moves against the position beyond that time price point, the astrological signal is considered failed and the trade is exited. Right. Ethics and psychology. Financial astrology is a tool, not a prophecy. Never trade beyond rational position sizing. The stars incline, they do not compel, and even the most powerful Saturn-Pluto conjunction can be absorbed in a world of central bank intervention. Humility, continuous statistical testing, and respect for free will must guide the practitioner. All right. In our appendixes, which you can look at, we have Appendix A, our planetary physical ephemeris here, like Uranus entering Gemini, Neptune entering Aries, and Pluto entering in Aquarius. We see communication and transport revolution, new inflation narrative, speculation curve, decentralized finance blooms. All right. And then we see for Appendix B, The NYSE natal chart data, Buttonwood. It's been rectified. And then for Appendix C, we have a bibliography and software resources. So take a look at this stuff, take a picture if you want, and I will see you guys in the next video. And we're going to go over, yes, I'm pretty sure we're going to go over this here. Engineering advanced astrological applications for wealth, influence, and reality sculpting. So I'll see you there with peace and love. Thank you for watching. Piscean out.